Etik ve itibar.
Distinguished stakeholders of the Ethics and Reputation Society, welcome to the 8th International Ethics Summit. On behalf of the Ethics and Reputation Society, I would like to appreciate our gratitude to you for joining the 8th International Ethics Summit. As you know, our society, founded in 2010, has more than 150 members and trying to deploy the principles of ethics and to raise awareness in the business world. As you all know, COVID-19 pandemic deeply affected our lives, and with the team New Thresholds and New Horizons, we'll be discussing about the future, how we can have a sustainable and human-oriented future. We'll have 4 different teams and 4 different days of a webinar, and we'll be speaking about, in particular, the different topics like paradigm shift in capitalism, and at the same time discussing about the colors of diversity and how we can have the ethical design for the future of digitalism. As you all know, we are aware of and at the same time we would like to open up to the horizon. Throughout the event, you all will be muted. During the Q&A session, you can actually address your questions. And our panelists will try to answer the questions at the end of the webinar to the extent possible as time allows. If you wish, you at the same time can write down your name and at the same time your company, and at the same time please mention who you are referring the question to. And thank you very much for joining the summit. And I would like to give the floor to the President of the Ethics and Reputation Society, Ertuğrul Onur, for the opening address. The floor is yours.
Merhaba.
Distinguished representatives of the non-governmental, the civil society and the business world, distinguished participants, distinguished members of the press, distinguished members of our society, welcome to our 8th International Ethics Summit, organized by our society. Since last March, as you all know, COVID-19 pandemics have affected deeply our lives, not only the business life, but at the same time in the entire social structure, a lot has changed. Of course, as you all know, during these days we cannot physically come together, and rather than freezing the world, we just decided to address to some new matters. This is also a requirement for each and every one of us. And our society, thanks to your contribution, actually decided to organize the 8th International Ethics Summit as digital. As the executive committee of the Ethics and Reputation Society, and you have actually joined us, and thank you very much for honoring us by joining to our webinar today. As you all know, throughout the history, things are changing so fast. These are the rare moments in the entire history. We both at the same time have hope. We have a pandemic that actually almost paused the entire world, also at the eve of the entire climate change. We even have some difficulty to actually catch up with the pace of capitalism, that is actually the technological changes, the technological evolution. I think time is actually going so fast, and from this perspective, our summit will just try to give an answer to some of the questions. We're not only aiming at actually finding answers to the questions, but rather raising our voice loud so as to have a discussion over these topics. For many long years, the entire world, at the same time, as you all know, faced an economic order aiming at the highest maximum possible profitability. And as we can say, capitalism, there is actually an idea, but as for the businesses, it is actually maybe cruel competitiveness. And as for the corporates, as for the criteria for success, only about how much they actually gain. And only the most powerful will survive. However, capitalism is not only about making money, but since the Neolithic revolution in the entire society, it's actually an integral whole of different actions and trying to open up the horizon for this. For all the societies, there will be actually a generation of wealth. But it's actually quite obvious that that's not where we're trying time to go. Nikos stated that the only goal of the corporates is actually maximization of profit. This actually started to be questioned a lot. Firstly, at the beginning of 2000, several crises started, and Capitalism 1.0, that actually concept, hit to the wall and on different, for example, corruption crisis, and end up with 2008 economic crisis. And it was quite obvious that there is the need for the beginning of a new era. And some of the ideas started to flourish at that time. Of course, the goal of the corporates is not only actually to gain, to make money, and at the same time to compete with the rivalries. And also it is all about creating some common values, and several authors started to say it aloud. And especially for the companies are allowed to grow more, but at the same time they should contribute to the advancement of the society. That is Capitalism 2.0. It is exactly the reason why we are discussing this. Financial capital is getting more humanized, and at the same time making it one of the priorities as the public interest and being integral with our environment. And these are all actually helping us to actually have more hopeful futures. Capitalism 2.0, looking at the main principles, I can say, it is at this point must be the business ethics, especially in the long run, having a sustainable economy and focusing on creating value for the society. And at the same time, to be inclusive and covering all the players in the business world. It could be the customers, investors, the shareholders, and the entire community that we're talking about. Therefore, business ethics is actually like a mortar that is bringing up all together. The concept Capitalism 2.0, besides that, for many long years, we've been discussing about the concept of sustainability of the corporates. And there are also no developments, and I think it's very valuable to also discuss about the sustainability of the corporates. I think we're all aware of this, that social media is actually replacing the conventional press. And in today's digital world, there are several damages that the ethics or some misconduct of compliance may give. And there could be several commercial losses. It even would be quite difficult for the biggest corporation in the world to compensate for this. That's the reason why for one company, corporation to be sustainable, it is very important to actually be compliant and to be ethical. I think what is important as much as the fiscal tables is actually at the same time all the compliance and the ethics values. It's very important for the sustainability of the company. I think for the corporations to survive, the must is actually to have a proper balance between the revenues and the expenditures. So actually it must be a reproducible revenue. It also leads to more productivity and efficiency for that specific company. Sustainability, I can say, is for a specific company in its economic and ecological environment, what decisions are taken. And therefore it is all about creating a long-term value. From this perspective, while we're designing the strategies of the companies, ethics and compliance is very important, and it would be a mistake if they do not put it at the center of their decision-making process. Our Turkey, before United Nations and OECD, has several conventions on anti-corruption, and the private sector at the same time is acting as a coordinator for compliance with these rules. And for the companies at the same time to make the ethical principles and culture a part of their way of doing business, and for the purpose of making all the players to abide by this, we've been working as a society for the last 10 years, and we're more than happy and proud to do so. Therefore, ethics, reputation, and compliance, all these principles and all the risks at the same time should be managed properly. Accountability, corporate responsibility, raising awareness is important. We're focusing on this, and at the same time to make this an integral part of the culture of the companies in Turkey. And we have more than 150 members and corporate members that are all leading players in their own industry. As the society, our ultimate goal is in the business ethics, in particular, to provide support to our stakeholders, but at the same time to have a holistic approach and to deploy the experiences of the best practices of the companies in Turkey, therefore to be actually a point of reference and at the same time a point of training. This is the 8th summit that we are organizing, and this turns into a global event. And this time we will have 4 different topics to be discussed in 4 different days. And in particular, we'll be discussing about paradigm shift in capitalism, colors of diversity from an inclusive perspective. You are as strong as your weakest link. Are you aware of your third-party related ethics and compliance risks and ethics by design in digital future? We at the same time will have several distinguished speakers, keynotes, panels and interviews, and we'll have a thorough understanding and discussion of each and every topic. It is really important to actually set some new thresholds and to open up new horizons. We are deeply in need of this nowadays. And we will be discussing about the ideal of a business world that actually has full compliance with the ethical rules. And at the same time, I'd like to thank to all the speakers to share their time with us, and of course you that accepting us as the guests at their houses. And thank you very much, and we're really more than happy to be here with you. Thank you very much for this opening address. Now, I would like to invite the CEO of Unilever, Turkey, Asia and Iran, Mustafa Seçkin, will be taking the floor.
Okay, for the sake of time, I'll go back to what I've just said. Firstly, I would like to thank Mr. President and all the dear participants and express my gratitude. Hopefully everyone is doing well health-wise, and of course it's really important nowadays to be with our beloved ones. In the occasion of the 8th Ethics Summit, it's really a pleasure for me to be with you, with all of you, and we'll be discussing and looking into different aspects of sustainability, which I have spoken many times in different occasions, but today's topic theme is quite a big one. And on behalf of Unilever, we also prefer to always speak about the new horizons and great reset or the paradigm shift in capitalism. These are all interrelated themes, but hopefully new horizons and new thresholds is something that has been exciting me a lot. Therefore, I have to say that I'm quite excited to be with you in this session. In addition to that, I've been following the society's activities recently in particular, and I really admire what you are doing, in particular in terms of raising awareness in ethics. Ethics being recognized as the core of business making today are quite attractive topics to me. Mr. President has already touched upon 2 critical aspects, and I will be echoing in some of the aspects he has already uttered, but I don't think it would be a problem re-mentioning these aspects, although it might seem as a cliche, but we're on the verge of a big transformation in the world today. And I don't know how much we can appreciate and internalize this, but there is one fact that we have to agree upon absolutely in restructuring the future. We all individually do have responsibilities, and I do feel quite responsible being a part of it, because the more we are involved in it, the more we will evolve the future together. Okay, this transformation that we're speaking about, is it truly because of COVID pandemics? Of course, COVID pandemic may have accelerated the execution of this transformation, making some aspects quite crucial, but it doesn't seem to be the only reason. Let's take a look at what has happened in recent years. Especially after the Second World War, the economic system system or the free market economy created the basis of development. Millions of people on Earth have improved their living conditions. Today, more than 100 million people are above the line of poverty, as we know today. In education, medicine, technology, and in many domains, we have witnessed incredible developments, innovations took place, and we are now speaking about a GDP that has just evolved into hundreds of billions, trillions of US dollars from 1.3 trillion. So altogether, we have been watching the innovation quite closely, and for the sake of humanity, we've been in big prospects. Though with a big price to pay, unfortunately, we need to speak about the other side of the coin. And in particular, I will be speaking about two aspects. One is the social unemployment and the other, the environment. Essentially, today, everything that we've been speaking about are based on these two aspects, two themes. Now, social inequality. From the perspective of social inequality, all the reports indicate that, say, 25 years ago, the wealthiest 10% has now increased ninefold. I mean, it was quite lower in the past. Actually, the rich got richer and the poor got poorer in terms of the share they have taken in the pie. Actually, speaking of macro figures, it shouldn't just be on an intangible way. Looking around, we can say the same thing quite easily. And I have to make a point that we all, including all the participants who've been watching us now, when they're born, it's like the lottery, and we're all among the lucky minority, getting the best education, best schools, and the best living ways. And of course, this minority, which seems to be luckier than the unfortunate majority, had more to do within the society. Yes, the pandemic has not helped the situation, obviously. For instance, you know, the research of Oxfam on inequality. Looking into the survey, 87% of the participants said that the pandemics will be causing an inequality in revenues in their respective countries. 56% say that the pandemics probably will be contributing to gender inequality. Actually, we can easily see this on the TV shows and news, like the stimulus packages of the central banks, emissions of the respective countries, and how they are delivered to the societies are discussed at length, unfortunately, with some concerns. Another field of concern is, of course, the environmental issues. The risks that we might be facing in the coming years are also indicated in the reports, according to which climate crisis and scarcity of the resources will again be the #1 concern for all the societies. The Global Economic Forum has published a report indicating that out of the major 7 risks, 3 is about environment. Actually, there is no need looking into the reports for it. Just look around, and within the last 1 year, earthquakes, floods, many other natural disasters just got in the pipeline. Now we're in February. Even looking into the weather forecast, you personally will understand the severity of the problem that we are facing. And within the natural ecosystem, I don't think that the plants and animals are quite happy about it. On the other hand, there are the other pleasing developments. We are all following the Green Act of the EU. Of course, it will have a close impact on economy. Technological power of innovation actually is in the verge of a new mile, and we've been seeing the new first examples of it. All the research work and the references say something. #1, development is not anymore measured solely on paper with figures. We've long done that for many years, but at the end of the day, we are not in a sustainable point anymore. For a sustainable life, new measurement criteria will need to be identified. For instance, access to clean water, participation of girls in education, preservation of the forests, and other maybe new units or measurement indicators we need. The one that really excites me is the happiness index next to GDP. Actually, in the philosophy of economy, it indicates that economy is not the target, though should be a purpose for happiness. But now we need to rediscuss around all of this. We need to just redefine all of these at once. The second one is development of the society in an integrated way. The private sector has a role in that. Unilever also has a new vision in this respect. 10 years ago, we were one of the first companies putting this in our vision. Sitting aside and watching everything that has been happening is not to be expected from the major institutions now. The private sector will need to take some place. So we have set a new vision for this purpose. In the last decade, we've been basing our activities on this new vision. Rather than sitting and expecting everything from the public authorities, we believe that the private sector will need to put a hand in this responsibility, not the private sector only, but also the NGOs, all the segments of the society, down to the individuals. I think it's really crucial. Undoubtedly, for a better world today, responsibility of the companies is maybe more than ever, and will continue to be so in the future. Like a few years ago, we were at the point of convincing people. Quite happily, today, rather than trying to convince, we are sitting and discussing the new agendas and discussing how we can move on with the new agenda. So we, as the private sector, have a better contribution, which I have to say is a pleasing development in Turkey, and I really care about this happening in Turkey more. Of course, there are some critical structural problems in Turkey, inequalities, coping with inequalities, and it doesn't matter who is ahead, who is behind in development issues, and our aim is not to realize a dream alone, but to create a quick impact, because in fact there is no other way that I can think about. An example to it is the invention of the vaccine, and we can show this is an example because at the end of the day the problem that we have faced in the world it was just unique to us there. The cooperation with the private and the public sectors really created really favorable outcomes, as we happen to see with the vaccine, so that we will concentrate on the joint gains rather than who won, and we can feel that the joint gains is the best gain. At the very point, actually, from shifting from the short-term shareholder way of working, society-centered working of the private sectors is not about a social responsibility. Right on the contrary, it should be considered as a must that they will make themselves profitable. Within the existing economic conditions, we now have to accept a fact, undoubtedly. On one hand, we prioritized financial targets, but on the other, maybe as important as that, we will concentrate and run towards the joint social targets, and it will be only those companies who can achieve both will survive. It's not anymore the world that will favor the short-term targeted companies, but rather long-term society-based companies to survive. And I really feel lucky in this respect, because Unilever, from the very beginning of this change, has been involved in this process, rather has been a pioneer and an inspiring company in the paradigm shift. Though it was not an easy start off, we needed some long time to show that it's a working process, but every moment was worth that. Now it is time time to speak about the future, and it really pleases me to turn our faces to the future. Now, I would like to give you some headlines as to what we've done in this process as an example of what we've been through. The first thing is, as we were running towards our growth targets, fighting with environmental and social inequalities also became a target for us. We now were sure that the two targets didn't contradict with each other as we believed in 10 years ago, integrating all these aspects in our ecosystem, industries, and the business world, and we tried to be an inspiration for everyone. And we set up a structure for long-term planning. In 2009, so as to go beyond short-term plannings, we just left aside the monthly financial planning and reporting, which was experimental at that time, but the markets and our investors really embraced this understanding so that we've become a very good example. In the reporting aspect, we've taken other steps. Therefore, from that day onwards, we're supporting this reporting, and the reports that we're using is based on internal auditors and reported as such as the financial reports. On the other hand, we are believing in a multi-stakeholder governance. Actually, this is really worth speaking on today, because the mentality putting the investors in the center now had to be moved away. The way to do that is to adopt multi-stakeholder way of working. What do I mean? For a sustainable business, all stakeholders are integrated in our business processes to make value. First, our employees, of course, the customers, of course, the suppliers and the broad ecosystem, consumers, society, and our planet, so environmental issues. So this order with 6 stakeholders have become an unavoidable core of our business. And in all decisions we are taking, if we are doing a good business, this business must be touching upon the 6 aspects that we are caring about. This is still the way that we are working more than a decade. We've been basing our experiences on the fact that as the company grew, we focused also on creating a social and environmental contribution to everyone, and this what we have convinced everyone. Plus climate change, social inequalities, and the other problems that the world has been expecting solutions for have been in the core of our new responsibilities and commitments. Briefly, I'd like to make a summary of all of this, and in particular I care about the health aspect, which I will be speaking in a minute. Firstly, in coping with the climate change, what are our commitments? By 2039, in all our products, emissions will clearly be brought to the level of 0. 2039 may look quite a long time, but as you know, the deadline by the Paris Convention is 2050, and our commitment is to be achieved 11 years earlier than this convention. So we need to work harder. So as to accelerate these interventions, with the brands of Unilever, we've come together. 1 billion euro resource, a budget has been created for afforestation, carbon management, and wild preservation, water preservation, which will be put in implementation within the next 10 years. Coping with social inequalities also involves some other commitments as follows. By 2030, the direct goods and service suppliers of the company will be brought on these commitments. If there are some legal aspects, some problems, we will need to fight against these problems. I mean compliance issues. Not only us, but all the suppliers that we've been cooperating with will need to abide by compliance, and we have to make sure that they put human in the center of everything they are doing. And by 2025, we will create a business volume of 2 billion euros, and this also will be involved in our inclusion principle. In terms of inclusion, I think it's really a big amount of money. And also for the SMEs, by 2025, a new skills, financial resources and technology will be provided with our support. As you might guess, there are many details to these commitments. On the other hand, not only in Turkey, but also around the globe, the screen and advertisements are important. Therefore, we will make sure that we increase representation in terms of our commercial advertisements. And every penny or every lira that we are spending will be based on it. For our employees, new working models will be developed, and by 2030, 10 million of young people will have been made ready for the business opportunities with the equipped basic skills that we will provide. And from Turkey, and as of my position, the share in Turkey will need to be triggered as soon as possible, and I can't wait for it. So the commitments I care about very much, truly they are, because in the next 10 years, the commitments that we will be making in our sustainable social plan were achieved by 80%. You may criticize why not 100%, but the commitment is rather about the power of what has been achieved rather than what has not been. We have achieved 100% in some areas, though 70–80% in some others. But if it weren't for these commitments, we wouldn't have achieved what has been achieved so far. I think it's really having a big impact. Particularly, I would encourage the leaders of big industries to put commitments for their future. Growth, profitability are big, really priorities for the companies. But from the point that I'm standing, I rather see the system of values, which is more important. What do I mean by that? We see quite positive impacts of these values on our own employees, in particular for the younger generations. Working in the old way of doing business is unfortunately not anymore possible. Therefore, we will need to concentrate on a system that cares about the system of values, also which will be important in attracting skills and talents. And Unilever puts human in the center of everything. From the very first day of our foundation, this has remained unchanged. And we've seen this quite intensively during the pandemics. Our business models have changed swiftly. The change is inevitable, but as I said, the 6 stakeholders are quite critical. Our consumer society, employees, business stakeholders, business partners, and our planet. These are quite critical for us. And as long as these 6 survive, the rest will just go with it. And this change, though, is not something that can be achieved only by a single company. Within the circle of this discussion, I have to say that we wouldn't see a big impact if it were only Unilever doing it. But what really matters is to make an inspiration, be an inspiration, and to be all in finding solutions as a stakeholder for finding solutions. I'm sure that you had the chance of following in the Global Economic Forum. The main theme was the contemporary capitalism, and actually in this stakeholder capitalism we have undertaken some commitments so as to make our reportings according to this criteria, which I believe is a big development, because thanks to this reporting, especially environment, world, human and governance areas will be the 4 themes that the companies will depend on in making some measurable items. In terms of creating measurable values, the courage to report, I think, is a big step forward for the business world, and I hope you all agree with this opinion of mine. I believe truly about the future-oriented thinking, but now we are on the verge of forgetting about what we have known for quite a long time. So we need to leave aside our old way of thinking and to take leadership in the new way of thinking. Otherwise, there will be a high price to pay. When building a better future, the gains that we have made so far shouldn't be forgotten, though. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the Global Economic Forum, has said that capitalism must do a reform to continue to exist. I truly believe in this, and I think it's going to be a big opportunity ahead of us to make it happen. Ertuğrul in 2020 thrust parameter concluded that according to the parameters, if you're following the parameters, you are quite a trustworthy company. In this reform, capitalism, with of course its fruits to provide, we need to make some changes in some aspects. I think it's going to be the best definition of the reform. What are the aspects to be changed? A multi-stakeholder way of working, sustainable economy, fair distribution of resources, and ultimately regulations, governance that will make this happen. One thing I believe, our aim is it should not be to turn back to the old way of doing things or the old normal, because the old normals have already lost their validity, transparency, trust, and cooperation, collaboration, multi-stakeholder partnerships will be the foundations that will make the future possible to be built together. Everyone being with us today, I'm sure, says that they are in for this kind of a future, which makes me quite optimistic for the future, which makes me get out of the bed and come to my job every morning. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this great talk. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now I will give the floor to Tayfun Zaman, and the member of the Executive Committee of the Society. And he actually had an interview with Salim Kadıbeşegil, the founder and the advisory board member of RepMan. Let's listen to them.
Değerli dostlar merhaba.
Hello.
İtibar
We are back again at another summit of the Ethics and Reputation Society, the 8th International Ethics Summit. As you all know, New Thresholds, New Horizons, the theme of this summit. We have a threshold that is brought by the pandemics, and now we'd like to have a totally bright, more humanistic, more sharing horizon that we're looking at. Are we doing so? If not, what we should do? At this part of the interview, we're together with Salim Kadıbeşegil. There's no need to actually introduce him, but he's a mentor to me, I should say. Maybe I can say the actual definition of literacy in the 21st century. Whenever, for example, I read something and I said, Salim, I've just read this book, and said, I've already read the book. And whenever I just try to write down something, Salim is telling me that I've already written that. So his intellectual capacity is not something to be brought down back to literacy only. I can say that actually Salim defined the new term of literacy in the 21st century. So welcome, Salim. Thank you very much, Tayfun. I have no idea what to say after this introduction. Maybe you should actually lean back and try to enjoy the interview. Actually, I'm just talking about the facts. I can actually see 2 of your books at your back, and over 40 years of an experience, and you actually an intellectual that wrote 10 books already, and therefore I think it's very important to introduce you to our guests. Thank you very much. Thank you. So, today, let's start a journey with you. World Economic Forum, as you all know, for almost 2 years almost, saying that Now we are actually at the eve of a new reset, and we actually have to redefine capitalism, and especially at the eve of, especially there's a need for this paradigm shift, and pandemics is actually an opportunity that we should use. Of course, it is not actually fully defined, this reset, as a term, but I think it's an important term. As you all know, if all the bosses of the world are coming together and speaking of the same thing, it means that we should at least try to understand what this reset is. Of course, I can say they're speaking out an entire reset at the community level, but as you all know, in the business world, whenever we say a reset, it starts with the companies and those who are managing those companies. I think 25 years ago, mission and vision started to be used, and especially the Turkish companies started to copy and paste the handsome missions all around the world, I can say, but it was an important threshold, because if companies actually, once they have a mission and they have an identity, it is a good thing. But what is important is actually to have a business model that is compliant with that mission and vision. And if they can actually, then they can be actually a world citizen and a corporate world citizen. We have successes and failures, but of course we'll be speaking about success stories today. And while I was getting prepared for this discussion, I actually come up with Brand Service, for example, meaningful company. And as much as I know, you have just met those terms before me, I have no doubt about this, but maybe you can help me a little bit to understand those terms. And the world is looking for something new. In Rio UN conference in 1992 it started, Sustainable Human Development, and that was the time. But of course it started long ago. I'm looking for the searching for something new. But at Rio conference, actually seeds sown, and I think we actually have the reflections of that Rio conference today. For example, the imperfect at that time, and I'm just learning those things from actually my daughter, by the way, but I have to fill in these terms. Maybe I should have also said Fahri Kadıbeşegil, son, the son of an intellectual, the father of another intellectual, and also the grandfather of an intellectual, I can say. I don't know, maybe 30 years later, when we're just speaking about sustainability, will be your grandson or granddaughter will be speaking about meaningful company, about purposefulness. I just wrote an article, and I would like to actually make a reference to my daughter. Maybe I will make it much more personalized now. But the core motive and this grand purpose that was being discussed for the last 8 to 10 years now. And truth is saying, that is the most difficult question. What is the reason of your existence? I mean, your company. For example, your company is not established only for making profit. They actually found a problem, and solving a problem is also a part of this existence. For example, your employees, why they're coming to work every day, so as to identify a problem. And at the same time, all the employees, what competencies do they have so as to find a solution to that problem? You actually have to reveal it and then let it shine. It is not only profitability. I mean, if you only have profit as a goal, it will make your company look weak, and it also would mean that you actually have no ambition. It's an important finding. Why? Because where we actually have to bring this. In August 2019, the Business Roundtable, which started in 1970s, I can say, the CEOs of the biggest corporations worldwide, that is a lobby, and it's a declaration by them. And in that declaration, they said, we, about for the raison d'etre of the corporates, we're changing it. For over 100 100 years, a matter that's been the backbone of the capitalism turned upside down. And then they said, what we, for example, define as the shareholders, the raison d'etre of the companies, now it will be replaced by creating value for the stakeholders, shareholders. I mean, it could be raising the satisfaction or living standards of the employees, and at the same time, it could be, for example, paying attention and being respectful for the environment, for the ecological environment, having some performance areas sensitive for this, and to actually have more ethical and more fair contracts with your suppliers. So we think about the chain of things in here. I don't know, of course, to what extent they are sincere or not, but time will show. But I think about the raison d'etre of the companies, I can say there is actually a change, and at the same time a need as well. For example, stakeholder capitalism, it is something I think beyond the dimensions of this. Even I can say it is beyond the social capitalism, and we're just living in a world going through that direction. At the same time, meaningful company, I mean, creating social benefit or interest. We already have it somewhere, and one of the recent examples I can say, just to open up the topic, 1 month ago, one of the biggest companies in the world, Unilever, sent a memorandum to the suppliers and said, until 2030, and you also will be accountable for the living standards of your employees. So they at the same time should have a living standard, a humanistic living standard. And if you actually have a role in making this possible, you also should assume the responsibilities that you have. I will also check for this. So Unilever is one of the biggest corporations in the world, and signing such a memorandum, and if you just look at the back, you actually have to go back to 1989. What happened there? At one moment, Dan & Jerry, a company founded by them at that time, they were not only producing ice cream, but also they were dealing with the poverty in Africa, dealing with the global warming, environmental issues, dealing with the human rights issues. How they were doing it? They were generating reports, publishing them on their web page. I mean, they acted as an activist, and they created a raison d'etre at that time for this. And in 1989, one of the sustainability reports published by Dan & Jerry at that time. And no one at that time discussed about sustainability or corporate responsibility or social reporting. That was not the case at that time, but they actually had their suppliers audit their companies and hiring some external auditors. And the second breaking point, I mean, back to the memorandum by Unilever, in 1999, United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan published the Declaration about Sustainable Human Development, and so as to attract the companies abiding by this. And 36 CEO undersigned that declaration, and Unilever was not there, but P&G, the number one competitor, was there. And P&G, in parallel to undersigning this convention, started a major transformation at the beginning of the year 2000. Then 2002, this time, the executives of Unilever, but of course it is actually my interpretation of the event, but there was actually a big gap with the biggest competitor, and the gap is getting more and more. It's not something to do with the market or being product focused and so on. And they found out that as social interest is very important, and one of the performance area that is creating social interest is the reason why there is a gap between them. And if you just start learning it from scratch, it will take decades. But in 2002, they actually acquired Ben Jerry. It looked like by quite an ordinary merger and acquisition, but the reason is that we have no idea about how to do it. You should teach us how to do this, about the sustainability issue, about having being a social and a meaningful company, which policies we should make. So we're just buying you so you can teach us. And until 2008, they just worked as a like a lab, and Unilever used them. And in 2008, a CEO, Pullman, appointed, and a very important leader, and at the same time previously from P&G, and for a decade at Unilever, for Ben & Jerry's, and what they inspired, they deployed that culture to Unilever, and they changed the entire culture. So a month ago, to their suppliers, they send a memorandum. That is actually the history when we look retrospectively how it happens. I think, again, at the backstage of capitalism, in 1930s, we also observed similar things about meeting requirements to the marketing of the desires. And where they performed the actual marketing, they aimed at the mind of the consumer. About products, not products and services. Mainly, for example, quote, new consumer, and especially something that could be very meaningful for capitalism, and especially that marketing, I mean, in the minds. It brought us where about to create a new consumer, a consumption economy that we cannot handle, that end up with environmental pollution, then global warming, and at the same time, it actually has brought us to so many changes. That's the reason why some of the corporations started to judge themselves. So turn to the meaningful company that is creating a social interest, transformed into that. This, in this century, I think the speed will be faster, and I think the number of the companies acting as such will increase by maybe changing the raison d'etre of the companies. It will start. For example, maybe the members of the non-governmental organizations are started to be appointed to the board of directors or to the executive committee. The metrics of the members are changing. For example, they get bonuses on the financial tables, but now employee satisfaction and environmental issues at the same time are started to be considered for the performance assessment. It's okay, maybe you help us make good money for us, to the shareholders and so on, but at what cost? For example, about your plastic or the carbon footprint, what you have done, your social interaction with the environment. These are the things they started to assess. So the situation with the suppliers, for example. And last year, for example, some of the things implemented, for example, in human rights, about the refugees. Now we are just speaking about the brands that are taking action against us. For example, the pancake syrup producer changed even the name and the label. I mean, it even led to some of the radical changes. Why it happened? Because the economy is changing. I mean, I'm not asking you to produce ordinary these products. It is at which point you are about your sensitivity towards these issues. For example, they told us the brands should never involved in politics. That's what we studied. But now the brains are right in the middle of the politics and they're taking an active role. It could be about discrimination, for example. People were on the streets, especially about the African Americans, the Black Lives Matter, and Nike did what? For example, racism in the American Football League had protests and had the athlete as the face in his advertisement. So someone banned from the field for lifelong. And therefore, especially in social issues, $500 million at the same time of a fund. Or after Nike, and then Sarah Evan Williams at the same time started to be used. And I think it shows that something has started to change. And at the beginning of the year 2000, we started to hear, especially for the companies creating a social interest. And
benefit corporation'lar dediğimiz
again in the companies that we have, the benefit corporations, again with people 3 or 5 people, and more than 3,500 again B plus again benefit corporations that we have. What do you mean by benefit corporations? They do the job, but in ethical standards and by considering the social and the environmental issues, they do business. I mean, they manage life by considering all these issues, and these are maybe considered as the small and medium corporations. No, not.
Nerede gördük? Çok önemli bir uluslararası marka olan
Danone, for example, applied for this, an important international brand, said, and I would like to be a part of these benefit corporations. How they are going to do it? By actually, they have to complete a certification process, and they set 2025 as the target, and all the processes and all the strategies are designed accordingly. Now, my personal opinion is that, especially in those that are having a social benefit, I think the companies will turn to industries that create a social benefit. What do I mean by this? I think last May I wrote an article in energy, water, food, seed, pharma, in these industries. They also will evolve. And especially some international corporations at the same time will do that. So it actually, especially energy, water, pharma, these industries. It is not only money, but especially creating a social benefit for the planet. So at the same time by the international society, I mean, it will be managed by the international society. So and steps will be taken as such. Of course, you're not saying that there will be actually some, the reasons will be, some reasons will also be created for more, but after 100 years, maybe there actually will no more be some of the companies. And I said this based on what the same molecule, for example, so as to develop a drug, tens of companies and thousands of people at different parts of the world will spend billions of dollars and they perform a study, and there's only one drug that comes up at the end. However, if there is actually a superstructure that is managing this, then the very same drug with the very same people will be developed at once. They will produce it at once, and at the same time they will make it accessible to those who are in need of these drugs, and therefore the resources of the planet will be optimally used. And as a result of this, people actually will get what they need, and people who are in need of treatment at the same time will have access to these drugs. For the COVID vaccine, for example, we actually had a challenge of this. For this vaccine, for example, so as the producer, tens and thousands of labs worked for this, and billions of dollars spent for this. What I mean is that rather than doing this, all these resources, if they were managed collectively, I'm sure that the vaccine will be developed earlier and would be more efficacious, but at the same time, it will be a vaccine that is accessible by the entire world. And so it will actually be a health benefit for everyone. Now, what I'm trying to say in here is that, of course, my ideal is that, for example, for the world to turn into a Wikipedia society eventually. As you all know, in Wikipedia, there is actually a system. Everyone gives, everyone takes, and there's no actual money at the backstage, I can say. So it's all about our chain or a collection of values. And maybe at the same time, we'll turn to a Wikipedia society. Of course, there's no sign of capitalism that, or an era that there's no sign of capitalism that we'll be speaking about. So there will be a new governance model, but the most radical transformation, I guess, would be in the order of priorities. Together with capitalism, I guess money, human, and if time allows, environment, planet. That actually was the order. But in this model, first planet, then maybe nature, I mean the raw material and resources mainly, then human, then if needed, money. That will be the list of priorities. I mean, so that's how it would look, I guess. Thank you. As for the disasters that would happen to a company that will actually not meet the requirements of the stakeholders, if by experience and by our imagination we actually can define them, but it is not about not meeting the demands of the stakeholders, but it is mostly about ensuring the prosperity and well-being of the stakeholders. That makes sense. And I was about to ask a question, focusing on the stakeholders' well-being and making money, and you said one of the top companies in the world, and I'm sure that there are so many good best practices. Starbucks that I remember, especially fair commerce. You mentioned about Unilever, and we've actually opened up the horizon for this, but back to the industries that are working as the denominator of the humanities. Some of the, I think, interests are in conflict. The pandemics brought us there, but I'm not sure if the business world is ready to get the message that is conveyed by the pandemic. It's okay, on 3 molecules, several different companies are investigating it for years and spending so much money. And therefore not working so efficiently, I can say. And at the same time, the cost is actually borne by the people. It is such a price. We're speaking about such a pharma industry right now, but you stated that it is not with the today's model, but in an ideal model. For example, World Health Organization will actually be the umbrella. I don't know, maybe it is something that is even managed by the artificial intelligence, especially from the R&D side. In such a world, maybe this not so meaningful competition between the companies and this non-productivity will be wiped out of the surface of the world. Maybe we're looking for such a future. With the inspiration from the vaccine back to today, at one side, there are countries like us that would look like to be a part of this, but also the European Union that is actually around a collective high ideals, how the vaccine will be shared within the EU, even among their own members, not about the sharing of the vaccine all around the world. Therefore, the priorities are forgotten totally, in particular. Especially those that are equipped with high principles had a challenge, and as a result of this challenge they actually put aside some of the countries, and for a certain, it's actually a process in life and death issue, but they actually have changed their attitude. So what do you say about this? Especially, do you think the world is ready for such a transformation? Maybe the world is ready, but how about the administrators for this? There are several examples, and it is also possible to look at small cases and learn big things. I think it's very important to look at some of the cooperatives. For example, at Urla, there is Bademler village, and since the 30s, they actually have a theater, and the villagers are making the stage, and they're directing the play and so on, and they are the actors, actresses, but they at the same time produce, they sell their products, and over those values they produce. Or there is Gönence Cooperative, another one, and different cooperatives, and these are so nice small examples. For example, Uygar at the same time is the leader, Good for Trust, for example. So this is the new world. I think can draw big lessons. They've been there for decades, and somehow it happens. There is a good idea, but how you can well decorate that, and how you can make it a democratic participation, and how life can be maintained. So to make these things more clear, quite an irrelevant example, Robert Redford, for example, Sundance Vision. In 1980s, the Independent Film Center in the middle of, for example, a small village. And now, as you all know, it is the film industry center right now, and they serve the same purpose. And the people who serve the same purpose come together, they produce the same thing here with the same goal, and it actually turned into a social participatory model. Maybe you can adopt it to potato production, to vehicle manufacturing, or to the urbanization models. It doesn't matter. So what is important is the idea there, and at the same time how we can come together around that idea, and how we can build upon this. About the values of the European Union, whether it is the values are good or not. It is also about the vaccine, and as you all know, it was a big challenge for the European Union, because all these issue of the values, like world citizenship, being global citizens, and so on, these are the things that either converge or diverge us. Or, for example, the grand purpose, and at the same time turning into the benefit corporation, or Wikipedia, and or the business model. So these are the steps telling us that a new world order is coming. What is important right now is to maybe quantify them and to make them more in number. So the main pillars of the participatory democracy is always there, are always there.
And looking into ethical trade dimension, early in 2000s, it was barely $1 billion worth of a global trade volume, and last year it was almost $6 billion US dollars. So what does it mean? As consumers, we are changing our mentalities. We're just evolving in our mentalities. So we want to switch over to somewhere else, which is not far away. Even the biggest companies of the world are sitting and just thinking about the fact that this trend may be permanent, so they're trying to focus themselves onto it. Mr. Kadıbeşegil, thank you very much. As always, it's been a really wonderful dialogue with you. Hope it was the same for distinguished participants. You've covered the stakeholder demands and finished with human resources, and of course we've talked about the joint efforts of humanity in some sectors, particularly pharma, energy, how the needs will be designed for the future. Hopefully we will be governed in line with these ideals. Hopefully the companies will take their position in that formulation, because the people are just switching gears in big companies, and the world is changing. Therefore, the people who are making these laws and these designs, and of course, undoubtedly us as the big companies, as the customers, we do have a place in it, which reminds me the scandal. What are the emission values of this car? I mean, should be the question that is asked by the customers rather than how fast it can go. And only then we will get to the point of growing ourselves and maybe the industries for the sake of humanity, of course. And only then we'll be experiencing capitalism only for the sake of humanity. We do hope so, and of course in our mindset, in our ideologies, but we'll see, we'll wait and see, because it just boils down to the decisions of humanity. In closing, any final remarks? Meaningful company, meaningful industry, and meaningful life. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. It was an honor, sir. Thank you. It was really wonderful coverage, and hope to see you again. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Tayfun and Salim, for this session. And now we will be coming to the panel discussion on the Great Reset. Tayfun Zaman will be facilitating the panel. Panelists are renowned people. Gemma Aiolfi from Basel Institute of Governance, and Mr. Nikos Passas from Northeastern University. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. The panel will be in English, ladies and gentlemen. So if you'd like to switch to Turkish in interpretation, I will take my time introducing our speakers.
It's my privilege to share this panel with two esteemed colleagues. Today, I have with me Gemma Aiolfi, who is the head of compliance at the Corporate Governance and Collective Action Center within the Basel Institute on Governance. And I have Professor Nikos Passas. Nikos is a true son of the Mediterranean who has lost his way and found himself in the US. He's a professor at Northeastern University. Gemma and Nikos are acclaimed names in the global compliance community. They are esteemed colleagues and very dear friends to me. Gemma, Nico, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us on.
Well, I know that we haven't been using our time quite properly, so I will dive into questions right away. And I will reshuffle the questions, so because I know that Nikos has an appointment elsewhere. But anyway, I will start with you, Gemma, and I will ask you the ultimate question. What is conscious capitalism? Is it a new concept? Is it even useful?
Thank you very much, Tayfun. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to join you and a great honor. And thank you, Nikos, for being a little bit patient. I know you have to run away, but let's see if we can get started quite quickly. So conscious capitalism, reinventing capitalism, is it new? Sounds new. But I think it's been around for a few years. It's not really completely new. One of the founders described it as the innate potential of business to make a positive impact on the world. And it's possible to serve, align, and integrate the interests of all major stakeholders. And profits are also good and acknowledged as necessary and part of what a conscious capitalism is all about. And it's all about, it seems, awareness of the company within the world. I'm also a little bit wary of saying anything too critical, because I know that Nikos's university also offers courses on this, and he probably is more of an expert on it. But to me, it sounds very much like the stakeholder model that has been discussed for some years already, perhaps with another name that's quite catchy, almost like a marketing phrase that has been designed to hook in consumers. Because in a way, if you look at the companies that are propagating this concept most actively, perhaps, they tend to be very close to their consumers. It's Whole Foods, Nestle, Danone, food groups that clearly are sometimes under pressure to respond to consumer demands. Companies that are further removed from that pressure, immediate consumer pressure, are perhaps more difficult to integrate into this notion unless there are other ways of doing it. Most of those are perhaps subjected to NGO pressure rather than direct consumer pressure. So the claims that stakeholders can also be integrated and don't have conflicting interests is perhaps something that can be open to challenge. Is it useful? Then I think there are tensions between suppliers wanting high prices, consumers wanting low prices, employees wanting high wages, communities wanting clean water, clean air. Clearly, these are tensions. Perhaps some of them can be resolved within the conscious capitalism definition, but perhaps some of them are more difficult to do that. So companies make trade-offs. They make trade-offs all the time. They do so through risk assessments, through market pressures, through requirements by law and regulation. And clearly, one of the rationale for companies is to make profits. And there's an argument to be said that it's the shareholders that own the company, and therefore they should be the ones who should decide what happens to a company and how it should be changed. And in reality, we are seeing that, I think, with changes in non-financial reporting standards, with the way that investors have evolved their positions over the years. And if you look back, so 20, 30, 40 years ago, and how things have changed, even within our memories and lifetimes, and perhaps that's showing how old I am. But if you think back some years, corporate social responsibility investing involved excluding certain categories like tobacco from investment portfolios. And then came along environment and social and governance investing, which was aligning the social objectives and the financial objectives of a company. And then we got, and now perhaps that's where we're at the moment, is impact investing. So you see major investors divesting from coal or fossil fuels, like the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund or BlackRock and its pronouncements. So we're in a state of evolution. So is it useful? Yes, it's useful as a way of identifying how things are emerging and changing and how companies are responding to that. But I think companies respond as much to investor decisions as perhaps, in certain sectors anyway, as perhaps to consumer preferences and so on. There's lots more to be said, but I won't take the floor for much longer so that Nikos can have a say too. Thank you, Tayfun, for the first question.
Thank you, Gemma. Well, Nico, again, we are sorry for not being able to use your time properly. Let me dive into the questions, and I will merge my first two questions for you together. But we all know that the economic models, although new, they are big engines. They're big machines with a lot of moving parts, and the biggest of those parts are governments and regulators. Where do you put governments and regulators in this economic model? And we see a sharp rise in the influence of the executive offices, even in the most, or arguably the most advanced democracies. Do you think the leaders are ready for this economic transition? Do you think they will let this transition happen?
Well, it is nice to try and endow capitalism with consciousness. It's a good aspirational target, but look at the normality that brought us to where we are now. Just take a look at the current crisis. As far as preparedness was concerned, did the current stakeholder arrangements and leadership pay sufficient attention to intrusions in nature and trade in endangered species? Did it focus research and investment on the coming coronaviruses? Did it stock up in protective equipment, ventilators, and hospital capacity? Did it build adequate healthcare systems in order to deal with the coming crisis that everyone had forecast? When it hit us, did we share data fast and openly? Did we guide the public in proper conduct? Did we boost confidence in institutions and science? Did we coordinate treatments, vaccines meaningfully and globally? Are we paving the ground for the next pandemic? My fear is that, and the risks that we need to consider is that the inequalities and problems that are being exaggerated are not being helped by some of the state interventions that we have right now. Look at state central banks driving financial markets to record highs when hundreds of millions of people are suffering, leading to artificial pricing, leading to bubbles, leading to zombie markets, and junkie investors are dependent on state intervention. Instead of the proverbial tide that lifts all the boats, what we have is a tsunami that lifts only well-placed yachts and overturns the smaller vessels. And the yachts may be doing well, but we have devastation all around us. The 10 richest persons made enough to pay for vaccination of the entire Earth population, and 1 trillion was made by the top earners in the United States during the pandemic. In the midst of all this, the ILO is warning us about massive job losses. The World Food Organization is talking about massive hunger. WHO is telling us about vaccine nationalism. Others are using terms like biological warfare, the vaccines and how they're being used, modern piracy, and essentially all forms of protectionism. The balance between state and private stakeholders is not ideally worked out. This capitalism wears no clothes. It has a nose to smell near-term profits and benefits, but has no eyes to see beyond its nose and what happens in the medium and long term. So the question is, are we producing ideologies, neoliberalism, for example, that pretend to be keys to history, but turn out to be ways of escaping responsibility and accountability? Perhaps neo-socialism, for the very few, is a better descriptor of what we have in place. And at the same time, what we have is massive amounts of money coming and printing, quantitative easing and interventions in the state. And we have deglobalization risks to consider, trade shrinking due to extreme debt at all levels, national, company, and households, populism and onshoring of supply chains and production. We have lobbying from inefficient industries and conducive to favoritism. And we have big firms becoming even more dominant. We have governments becoming more oversized, and therefore risks of corruption and graft in oligarchic contexts. The cost of compliance to new rules and regulations may go up. The productivity may go lower. Slowdown in economies is another risk, potential supply chain and food disruptions, social unrest, and growth of demand and supply asymmetries. Those are the kinds of things in a context of possible international cooperation hesitancy and weakening of international norms and institutional frameworks. These are the risks that we need to address, and these are the tasks that leadership from all stakeholders demand attention. So to give you some answers, because I will have to leave in just a few minutes, the answer, the approach that I would suggest, and I will leave it to Gemma to walk you through all of this, is how do you incentivize, again, how do we rearrange the stakeholders, their respective roles and responsibilities, and how, in essence, do we make the interests appear and be clearly common? The path on which we are with inequality and other trends that we have is unsustainable. So we have to point out the sustainability limitations and show that the self-interest in the medium term is harmed. We cannot afford goods and services that we sell if the rest of the world is going under. You cannot designate a corner of the swimming pool as a toilet and expect that it's going to be clear swimming in the rest of it. The same problem is with the climate crisis. You cannot have pockets of cleanness and pollution, droughts, fires, and sea surges. The same thing with pandemic, that is everyone's concern. You cannot have herd immunity in one country and disease in another. Otherwise, variants and continuing disruptions are going to be with us for the foreseeable future, shrinking the market and undermining economic growth. What we need, therefore, is science with conscience, society and capitalism with conscience. We need openness, peer review, risk-based prioritization of research and investment and development, going for the common good. And on the other side, we need a collective wisdom based on science. We need conscience with science against misinformation, disinformation, populism, and all the problems that everyone is dealing with. So science with conscience, conscience with science. If you take science out of conscience, you're left with a con. No integrity, undermined democracy, a lower quality of life. So it is up to us to make it good with values-based compliance, solutions geared collective initiatives that take the solution to the problem and build it into the business model of corporations that need to make profit, better metrics based on outcomes rather than outputs, and a better balance of private, public, and social organization roles. And I apologize for the time that I took, but I have to run.
It was all yours. Thank you very much indeed. I hope to see you soon in another event, or hopefully after this pandemic, we will meet face to face, share a drink, share ideas.
Absolutely.
Until then.
Absolutely. And by the way, I am in the United States, but in Boston, the Athens of the North, the Athens of America.
Yeah, you are. Parapoli. Cheers. Well, Gemma, we are a panel of two now, with a lot of ideas to discuss and to digest. We were, I think, under the delusion saying that although we have our differences, when there's an alien attack, we will all come together and forget about our differences and fight together. About a year ago, there was an alien attack from within the world, and we didn't fight. We didn't fight together. We didn't forget our differences. We didn't lift our barriers. And Nikos has given us a wake-up call about that. So, from where he left, we have opened up with you with a strong question and asked ourselves whether conscious capitalism was even useful. And now I will come back to you and say, do we have good examples, at least, in corporate governance, in compliance? Because I know that we have enough bad examples in that area. Do you think there is also good examples? Do you have good examples to give us in the business world so that we can hold on to them and look for a brighter future for us?
Thank you. And thank you to Nikos, although he's gone for his also tsunami of ideas. And as he was talking, maybe I can just comment a little bit so that we have a bit of a bridge to your question. As he was talking, it reminded me how he listed out all the terrible developments that we've seen, the negativity that we've seen in the last year or so, and all the, if you like, the bad things that have resulted that have come out of the pandemic and everything. And I wouldn't disagree with most of what he said, or even all of what he said, but it also reminded me of how we talked about corruption some years ago, in that it was this insidious, terrible plague that infected everything. And if we all remember the opening words of the UN Convention Against Corruption, it undermines markets, it hurts the weakest, it affects every element of society. And when you read those words and when you think about the state of the world, it starts to all look very bleak and very hopeless. And when the problem is so massive that it needs so many things to make it right, it's too much to start thinking about how can we ever change anything. The temptation is, because it's such a massive problem, there's nothing we can do, that helplessness sets in and resignation, and what's the point, because we're all damned and going to hell in a handcart anyway. But we mustn't lose hope. And I think it's also very important to remember some of the good things and think about the positives and think about what we can change within our own ways of working and with what we are good at doing. So while I respect what Nikos said, I think it's also one side of the story. And it's certain, one thing is certain, is that the future is uncertain, but that has always been the case. And the world has seen plagues and pandemics before and has come out better. So we have an opportunity. Now, this has also developed into quite a few catchy phrases, the Great Reset, the Build Back Better, and so on. They don't necessarily make things clearer for anybody. So what do I think at the end of it all? I think we have to be optimistic where we can be. I think we don't have to give up. I don't think we have to resign. I think we have to believe in our institutions where they do work. Whatever happened in the US recently, in the end, democracy has triumphed. The institutions that were regarded as being fundamentally weakened still prevailed. And so people tend to dwell on the negative and what's gone wrong and what's terrible, but also there is the positive side. When we look at the pandemic, the development of a vaccine for a very complicated illness within 1 year, and to be rolled out on such a scale for millions of people at the same time, is phenomenal. The world has never seen anything like it. And it uses groundbreaking technology in the way, that's probably not the right word, but the way that it attacks the virus. So these are amazing human achievements that would not have been considered possible even a year and a half ago. I remember hearing, I think, David Nabarro from the World Health Organization saying quite seriously, and he's an expert, we will need 4 years for a vaccine. And he turned out to be wrong, and it all happened much more quickly. Now, sure, there's vaccine nationalism, there's all the things that have gone wrong, but let's just hold on to the phenomenal human achievement that made it happen. So, just trying to redress the balance there a little bit before we all go out and weep and do nothing because it's all too hopeless. So, in terms of good examples, well, let's look for a moment what everybody's talking about: climate change, sustainability, and all those big ideas that are so fundamentally important and have been brought to the forefront by what has happened in the last year. The importance of how connected we all are to each other, how connected we are to nature and to the climate, to the planet, and so on. And are companies doing something about it? Is there something changing? And is there some hope? Well, I think there are areas of hope. And even if there are pockets of hope that are not grand enough in scale for Nikos, I think that they are green shoots that should be nurtured. So if you look at the EU's Green Deal, now the EU is by no means a perfect institution, and there are some in my home country who would definitely agree with that, but it's not my personal view. I think that the force for good that has been the EU has been tremendous. And they've sometimes had big ideas that have turned out to be good ideas. The Green Deal, as announced, is ambitious, and it provides, I think, green shoots of hope, and has some great ideas behind it that can be leveraged into good developments. So what is it? The Green Deal is the idea that we can transition to a circular economy, increase resource efficiency, address climate change, and have a socially fair transition. Now, of course, this is all made a bit more complicated by all sorts of things, such as there is no clear definition of what is sustainability. There are different phrases of it and descriptions by the UN and by other organizations, but I think we all know what we mean when we basically say we've got one planet, it's the only one we've got for the time being and for the foreseeable future. And however we treat it now, it has to last for a bit longer, and we should not do anything now that will wreck it for the future generations. At least that's a sort of interpretation of a definition. So it covers pretty much everything that we can think about. And things that cover just about everything, just like corruption covers just about everything, needs multiple approaches and policy coherence. And I think this comes back to something that Nikos said. We haven't got policy coherence on a grand scale. Multilateralism works sometimes, but not in the way that it was perhaps once seen as being the big savior. So policy coherence, perhaps at the EU level, is possible because of the way the EU works. But even there's some room for things going wrong, but at least there's the ambition. So I think if we think of in terms of what are good examples, where can there be hope? I think if we look at how the EU is approaching the Green Deal and the will to bring together different collaborators, different companies to have more dialogue, to grow this idea in different institutions, is actually a really good one and gives grounds for hope. Now, other countries and national governments will do their part and will have to do their part, because what the Green Deal will end up being, very probably, is a mixture of coercive measures. So there'll be laws and regulations and directives and stuff the EU puts out. And then there'll be incentives, perhaps. Incentives could be tax related. They could be negative in the sense of charges on companies. Governments might also promote self-regulation by companies and foster that approach. And of course, at the end of it all, what I'm keen on to promote, and I know that you are, Tayfun, is collective action. So companies coming together, collaborating, addressing all sorts of issues, not just corruption, but environmental problems, human rights, because they all intersect. As we know, all these things are related. There needs to be more coherence. And these things are being recognized as related, and therefore something we all need to do something about. So these are the things that I think are hopeful. The recognition that action needs to be taken, that joining things together is going to take place, and there are examples of it occurring. And companies don't need to use fancy catchphrases or slogans. They just need to do things and get together with others to deliver. And having joined with companies, either in their own sector or more broadly, and then together with governments, I think there's the potential there for great change. just one more word on this, and then I'll stop and talk too much. The EU has talked about looking at sustainability agreements in the context of competition law. Now, this is an area of some sensitivity in that clearly sometimes companies want to behave in a way that will make them conform to sustainability norms and ideas, reduce plastics, join together with other companies to look at how to develop green technology, whatever it might be. Some of those agreements or aims at merging together with others might start breaching competition laws. Now, the EU has recognized that and said, let's look at that and discuss how we can make sure that we don't undermine the whole Green Deal through competition law. The Netherlands has gone a step further already and has issued a draft paper. And it's a really interesting, very short document that sets out with examples of how companies can act together in a way that promotes sustainable products or sustainable approaches, and looking at whether they breach competition law. By coming together and giving all these good examples of good practices of how companies can make changes, I think are constructive approaches to changing the way we behave and the way that we've behaved in the past. So just some thoughts there to perhaps try and counterbalance Nikos's bleak picture of the world. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Gemma. Well, I have a final question for you. We have put all our weight on the shoulders of the companies. But as we know, this is a game played by two parties: the governments, the regulators, the lawmakers, and the companies. And above those countries and the lawmakers, there are intergovernmental and international bodies or initiatives like OECD and UN and G20, and to some extent B20, of course, with their pressure. Well, I know that you are very active in the global compliance community and platforms like OECD, B20, and UN. Can you give us your insights about their work? How do the leading brains in sustainability and compliance working in those platforms plan on leading us to a better future?
Well, I wish I could look inside their brains and tell you that answer straight away. So all I can tell you again is perhaps my little corner of experience within these organizations. And I think there's some fantastically good work going on within some of those organizations about how to solve some of the world's problems. It was interesting to me to look at the B20 Japan paper that came out of the Integrity Task Force there. And in fact, there's quite a long paragraph in that in 2019, the paper that came out that said everybody should prepare for a pandemic. Now, the sad part is, of course, that these were calls that were made before the pandemic, and they were pretty clear. But did people follow them? Probably not, because who wants to save for a rainy day when you can spend for a sunny one right now? So, yeah, there's lots of good stuff coming out. And how can we really implement it and make it operational and real? And that is a challenge. I do believe that is quite hard. What else are they doing? I think that the B20 in Italy, the presidency of the G20 this year is with Italy, has reconstituted an integrity and compliance task force. Collective action has been very much at the forefront last year in the B20 in Saudi Arabia. I hope that it will be equally supported in the B20 and taken up by the anti-corruption working group at the G20 level, but we'll have to push for that and lobby and hope that it will be taken notice of, because everybody speaks about all of these problems as being only solved through collaborative approaches, and collective action is a method to achieve that. So those are some of the ideas. We've also got an idea that has come out of the B20 process in Argentina, has been picked up by the OECD, and we're supporting it, and it's compliance without borders. Mm-hmm. The idea that the private sector, and the private sector is probably, some companies at least, quite well developed in anti-corruption compliance, fair competition and so on, have good experience with that, and to go and mentor state-owned enterprises. The idea originally was that they would actually go personally in-house and get an experience from both sides, so that the person from the private sector, from compliance, would go and spend some time in a state-owned enterprise and help and mentor their compliance program. Of course, this was all shelved through COVID, and we had hoped to pilot it, and we've got parties on both sides, state-owned enterprises and the private sector, keen to engage, but finding the right partners to marry up and so on is not easy. And we've had some almost pilots, but not quite got there yet. But the Compliance Without Borders is a nice idea. It's how can we help state-owned enterprises? What can the private sector contribute? And we all have to start somewhere. So these are the nice starting points, I think. So yeah, the digital transition, that's another huge area that we will see probably more of in the future. And with the pandemic and everybody working from home and cyber attacks and everything else, I think that what we will see is a huge step forward in compliance and digital ethics. And this will be a new area of interest and development as we go forward. And I think that these organizations at the international level will probably play a role in some of those standard setting ideas, perhaps together with the private sector. At least I hope so. But those are just a couple of examples that I've heard about and I'm familiar with. And there are many more, I'm sure. Yeah.
We all hope so. Well, Gemma, we are approaching the end of our time. While we had this nice conversation with you and discussion, of course, the floor was open for questions. We have received 7 of them and already answered 6. This last one deserves not an answer, but a full panel. But I will ask you anyway. Will this shift in the capitalism, shift in the paradigm shift in capitalism, be valid for the developing countries? Yes, no, and if yes, how will it affect the third world countries? Could you please enlighten us?
I love the way you give me these easy questions all the time.
Well, I said it deserves not an answer, but a full panel. But let's
it does.
Best.
So I guess one way of looking at way things develop in the world and those that feel like they might be further behind is that you can leap forward. And if you look in some countries in terms of the way that technology, instead of going through the processes that some of us went through with technology, they just jump into the where are we now? Perhaps this transition in capitalism, if it is a transition, is actually an opportunity for developing countries and companies in developing countries. So I was talking this morning to a company in India, and I would even hesitate to say that India is a developing country.
Exactly. Right, the
perception, yeah. And I was listening to how they were talking about an area of procurement, and I was thinking that's way ahead of many European countries. And so it was interesting. So this notion of, is part of the world going to get left behind? Actually, there's the opportunity to overtake, I think, without being too sweeping and generalizing. Sure, there's always a risk of people and populations being left behind. And that's an important element to think about in government policy. And that's why policy coherence, in the true sense, is important, that we recognize that not everybody is going to benefit from prosperity that comes with digital progress and so on. So, yeah, it's about making sure that these things are looked at in the round.
Well, thank you, Gemma. It has been a privilege sharing ideas with you, learning from your experience. Now we have to go back to the studio and reach the end of the day.
Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nishihan. It's nice. Thanks. All the best.
So thank you very much for joining us in this webinar. We really enjoyed it. February 17, Wednesday, at the same time, at the same place, between 17 and 19 hours, we'll be back here. And we actually will again be discussing with our very distinguished speakers to share the ideas about cause of diversity from an inclusive perspective. And thank you very much for joining us. Have a nice day.